Hi folks, you were Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the migration, the black migration from parts of Africa and primarily, I guess, the Caribbean in the 1950s to England. And when I say the Caribbean or Caribbean in the American pronunciation, we're talking the places like Jamaica and so on. What I saw a couple of movies. I saw one by accident. I was flicking through a few sort of movie scenes, and I came across a movie, sort of British production in the 1950s, of a movie where a very, very urbane, extremely urbane black man, I would think in his late 40s, early 50s, something like that, very well dressed, immaculately groomed, very well spoken, and who would be considered as being very sophisticated in wherever he would go, very well behaved, very measured in his speech, and of course it's been scripted for him in the movie, but nonetheless, he's depicted as being he's got a PhD, and he's a university lecturer who came to England to do his studies, went back to I think it was the Caribbean from the sound. There's a slight sort of inflection on some of the vowels suggesting a Caribbean origins, but he's saying how he said, look, he said, I've come to England and I've every right to be here. When I was growing up in wherever it was, let's assume Jamaica for the moment. When I was growing up here, we were told in school that your king, the king of Great Britain and United Kingdom, your king was our king, and that we were part of this great empire, and we were all one. And he said, so I've every right to be here in England. It doesn't matter that I'm black. I've every right to be here because this is what you English wanted or you British wanted. And you kind of sort of see the point. Okay, I mean, it's a serious stretch there, drawing a very long bow on that one, but you can see the point there. I don't agree with it, but I do understand the point. And he's this very sophisticated man, obviously well-spoken, well-dressed, and he is depicted as the typical immigrant coming from the former British colonies or the empire, or from any black black African country, coming from anywhere. He's just black. That's the issue. And he's depicted as being this as British as the British, if not more British than the British. And he can't get a job, even though he's got a PhD from a British university. He's clearly a genius, super sophisticated, again, well-spoken, well-groomed and so on. And he's got to drive taxis or push a broom or something like that because these damn racist white people won't accept him. Now, there's a bit of a problem I've got with this. Firstly, that's not the sort of people that came to England from the Caribbean, far from it, or from anywhere in Africa. The amount of those people that would exist in the entire African continent would be a tiny amount. And if there was even 100 people who were like that in the whole of the Caribbean, that would have been it. So the idea that he's the typical immigrant, and in spite of his superb qualifications that would be considered superb in any international context in any white country, he's treated like shit, and he can't get a job and so on. So I don't buy that for a second. The depiction, rather, the people that came were unemployable peasants in the main. I'm sure there might have been one or two in there somewhere that weren't that, but that's what they were. They were illiterate in their own language, and they were coming as entry-level labourers and no more than that. And many of them were criminals in their own country and engaged in all sorts of criminal behaviour and so on. So that was the reality. The people are coming. This depiction that these super sophisticated black people are coming and being discriminated against, and if you if you've got a problem with them coming, then you're a damn racist. And we fought a war to stop those sort of attitudes. Cue the Hitler music and that sort of stuff. So even in the 1950s, it was a sort of or late 1950s, it was a far more gently done, I guess, and subtly done than it is today. But that was the message. The next movie was the same thing. Again, an engineering PhD, very well spoken, very well groomed, wearing the sharpest sharp suits that someone on his salary would never have been able to afford anyway. Again, very well behaved, very sophisticated guy, black guy, and he can only get a job as a school teacher in some shit school somewhere. So that's him, and he's applying for all these jobs, but he's being turned down by those damn fucking racist white racists turning him down. Look at it. Look at fucking PhD, sophisticated guy. But again, I've done a vast amount of traveling around the world on business, and I have never met people, black people, that sophisticated. Now, I don't doubt that they must exist. I've seen interviews online of people like Thomas Sowell and so on. So clearly sophisticated black people do exist. Not very many, though. I mean, there's very few that would fit into that category. Now, there was I was in a situation where a number of African trade delegation heavies from one of the probably better off African countries, I guess. We were doing, this is some years ago, we were doing business with them, and these guys clearly have plenty of money. I mean, they're dripping in gold and diamonds and fuck knows what. And some of these guys, their ring or their cufflinks would have been almost equivalent to my net worth or something. They had plenty of money, these guys, and very sharp suits, but they weren't sophisticated. They were a bunch of corrupt dictator-like goons. But again, very look the part, immaculate presentation and so on. And they'd been educated in the West, but they still weren't able to come across as sophisticated and understanding, and their amateurism. They were so amateurish in negotiations or not negotiations, business discussions, I could call it. That I was amazed that they made it out of first year high school in studies of commerce or something like that. That was so. I again, traveling all over the United States and even talking to black lawyers and things like that, it's very hard to find that sort of sophistication. So the third one is a black nurse. Now she's been a matron at some huge hospital and highly qualified. Did her studies in England and she comes to England to live, but the only job she can find is washing dishes in a restaurant or something like that. No, I don't believe any of these depictions, by the way, but they're pure propaganda constructs. Again, superbly well spoken, immaculately groomed and presented, but the victim of racism. Now, these three examples that I picked out, and I'm sure there's more. These three examples that I picked out are gross propaganda misrepresentations of the actuality. People that are being sophisticated, again, the number that would exist is tiny. But let's assume that these people were real people. Then there's no way they'd have had problems getting employment. And then the reverse is the case, that if it is so difficult and England is so racist, why would you come here to England? Why would you come to England, and why would you stay if it's that bad? If it's that bad, why would you come? Why would you stay? Now, this idea that I should be accepted, if they're as urbane, sophisticated, and well qualified as those people, yes, they would have an argument. But there wasn't people like that who arrived in England. So if they depicted the classic or the typical Afro-Caribbean immigrant that was coming to England with all the not well presented, illiterate in their own language, speaking speaking that strange sort of, patois type thing and that sort of stuff, then it wouldn't have come across. As a propaganda thing, it would have had the reverse effect. It would have convinced anybody watching that these black people should not have come. So they have to depict it differently. So it's classic propaganda. Now, let's look at some reality there. There's I don't know how many people have heard of quite a famous singer back in the day called Shirley Bassey. Now, she was a black singer, or I think like her dad was black and her mum was white, or whatever it was. It came from a seaport area called Tiger Bay, which is in Wales, and where there were a lot of transient black sailors waiting for the next ship to come in before they went off, and merchant marine type sailors. And so she came from there, had a great singing voice. Now, so she was black and had quite a strong Welsh accent actually back in the time. Here's this black. Now, if England was as racist as they say, she would have been treated abominably. She would never have got work. She would never have, been able to get into society. So this Shirley Bassey, again, she had a good voice. She was able to enter singing competitions in local fairs, and pubs and things like that would have singing competitions, and she's able to enter those against all white singers and win. So if it was that racist, then she wouldn't have been able to enter these competitions in the first place. Secondly, certainly wouldn't have been allowed to win if England was as racist as depicted. But on merit alone, she was well behaved. And on merit alone, she had a great voice. It was a singing competition. So on merit alone, she was able to come away with the prize, which back in the day was, a considerable sum of money relative to the cost of living at the time. So now, if you look at her history, the Shirley Bassey, she went on to become quite a major star and, sang a lot of songs. You may remember the song, one of the early James Bond movies, Goldfinger. That was one of Shirley Bassey's early, huge hits. She's already quite an established singer at the time, but that was one of hers. Another James Bond movie, Diamonds Are Forever, and again Shirley Bassey sang the theme for that. And another big hit actually for her, that one. So Shirley Bassey, here's this black girl. She's getting recording contracts. She's got white managers, white promoters. Record companies run and owned by white people. The list just goes on and on and on. All these white people helping her, supporting her, promoting her, giving her good deals. Now, on top of that, though, and this is important, there weren't that many black people in Britain at the time, but this is when Shirley Bassey was growing up, 1960s, around there. But as far as I'm aware, every guy she dated and every guy she married was white. So she had quite a queue of white men wanting to, date her and marry her and so on. So again, if England was that racist, then that wouldn't have happened. She would never have got to first base in such an evil, wicked, fascist, Nazi, racist country. So this idea that England was racist is simply not true. It's an absolute total invention. What the English people didn't like was third world peasants who were, again, illiterate in their own language and very different in customs, habits, attitudes, coming to England and wanting to set up little Rastafarian type dreadlock communities and so on, and engaging in all sorts of criminal activity, absolute disrespect for social customs. So it was a behaviour thing. The local British people, English people, didn't like the behaviour of these folks coming in, and the people who refused to change their behaviour, or many of them, I'm sure some of them. So this was the issue. It wasn't about racism or skin colour, which the activists and the race grifters try and push. So this Shirley Bassey only had white suited male suitors. Now there were some black guys, American black guys, that tried to take her out on dates. And my understanding is that didn't work. She wasn't interested. She wanted to date white guys, and marry them as well. Now, none of her relationships appear to be, overly successful over the time, but that's beside the point. She still had to kill white men wanting to date her, and again, that wouldn't have happened in a society where skin color alone was the determination of racism. So it was never about skin color; it was always about behaviour. But it was interesting, even in the 1950s, the British government was sponsoring these movies. And I'll add another dimension to this, which is interesting, and it's kind of a backdrop to the story. During the McCarthy era in the United States, a lot of the communist activists and Jewish communist activists in particular were sort of run out of the business of TV and movies, and a lot of them came to England, and they ended up getting jobs at the BBC. And this is when the BBC particularly started to move off in a leftward direction. These were the beginnings of it. This was the nucleus of the change. So all these communists that were being run out of the United States came to Britain working for the fucking BBC and some of the commercial channels as well. And their left-leaning ideas seem to have, very quickly seeped into the woodwork of these media companies in Britain. But with the government wanting to bring black people in, as, if you like, a peasant worker class, wanting to bring black people in from places like Jamaica and so on, and wanting to break down any resistance that the British people had to it. And again, the resistance was based on the behaviour of these incoming migrants, not the colour of their skin. So the government decides, as race hustlers and grifters do today, so let's forget about the behaviour difference. Let's just ignore that. And let's say it's about race, and let's shame and guilt trip these people into accepting these migrants that they don't want and don't want around. And that was the purpose of it. And this was the movies, the early attempt at illustrating this. Well, if you disagree with black people coming in, you're a fucking racist, a fucking fascist, and a fucking Nazi. And this was so it was already a propaganda thing back then. Now that propaganda stepped up, but it hasn't really become that much more sophisticated. It's become more hysterical, but they really kept that similar sort of narrative. And but I was annoyed in particular looking at this, how they represented these black migrants as being super sophisticated, triple PhDs, immaculately dressed and all that sort of thing. I've never seen in my entire life personally met black people that sophisticated. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.